You guys are the best. I appreciate it. I know some folks are grabbing last bits of coffee. That's cool. All right. I think we're here. All right, y'all in the back. I can tell you're going to be the group I need to keep an eye on. This is why I did not want to speak behind the podium, because it would allow me to walk directly to you until, yeah, there you go. All right. Hey everybody, it is great to see you actually in person. This is the first in-person conference I have attended in 2 years. As I was coming in this morning, Francisco asked me if I found it okay. And I was like, oh yeah, we were here last time. And I was like, when was last time? This was like 2019. So it is really wonderful to join you all and see you in person. As the slide says, my name is Matt Solner. I'm here at the department in our Institute of Education Sciences, where I serve as the commissioner for our National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance. I'm also the department's chief evaluation officer. And we are going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I know thrills you all to no end. That is why you are here. Designing evaluations with moderate evidence of effectiveness. Who's with me? Who was excited for the evaluation session? Yeah, all right. I like it. All right, so we are going to do 4 things today, I hope. We're going to start by talking about why building evidence of effectiveness for your work matters. I trust you all are mix of grantees, those of you who are pros and those of you who are new. We will definitely ask those of you who are pros to raise your hand and say, yeah, he says do that, but when you actually get to do that, that doesn't work, right? And so please feel free to raise your hand and say, what do I do when this all falls apart? Because someone earlier talked about like divergences or wendings or whatever. With COVID-19 and what we've been through, these have been more than tiny little like drifts off the main road, right? These have been major adjustments to our plans. So we can talk about what you do when things don't go quite right. We'll talk about some practical considerations. I'll give you some resources that you might consider. And then we'll leave time in the end for questions and answers. Sound good? All right, everyone's excited. I appreciate it. So why build evidence? This is the level setting, shaming you all into building evidence if you don't believe in an already part of today's presentation. This is a participation encouraged presentation. I do not want to talk at you for 45 or 50 minutes. I also don't need you to get up and use the mics unless you're really soft-spoken. You can just shout if you would like. When you hear the term evidence of effectiveness, what comes to mind for you? Anybody? Give me something. Data? Someone said data? All right, what else we have? ESSA standards. Oh, she took it there. All right, ESSA standards. What else do we have? Things that work. All right, things that work. That's what I was looking for. Not that I don't love the ESSA standards, but things that work is what I was really going for. So all the time, I run around the Department of Education encouraging my colleagues to build evidence, and they often say, I don't even know what you mean by the word evidence. What is it? And so this is the definition that we use when we do trainings inside to the department about what we mean by evidence generally. And so you can see on the slide, we say, it's high quality information used to inform decision-making, created when appropriate analytic methods are applied to trustworthy data. So there's really 3 parts to this definition I want to attend to today. First off, evidence is not, and data are not collected just because. We don't make you give us APRs or GEPR data because we want you counting and enumerating things. We're not doing it just for fun. We're collecting data, we're building evidence for the purpose of doing something different, right? To inform some decision-making. And to do that, to ensure that it's high quality, we need to be sure that evidence is built atop 2 things: trustworthy data and rigorous analytic methods. And today we're going to focus specifically on this analytic methods component, but I'd be more than glad to talk with you guys later or elsewhere about any other part of this definition. And whoever said what works when I asked what's your definition of evidence of effectiveness gets today's gold star. You should feel like the proudest member of the NPD conference today because you got it just right. When we're talking about evidence of effectiveness, we're talking about specific kind of information about what works, for whom, and under what conditions. Oh, yeah. You may have seen this quote before. Someone in this room may have written this quote, in fact, some very wise person, because I stole it directly out of the last NPD annual report. And it gets to the point of why building evidence in this specific domain, of all the domains of teacher practice, of educator practice you might consider, why building evidence here is so critical. And at the end of the quote, Supreet's smiling, Supreet might have been the author, or she's probably seen this written somewhere before. All the information we have about how confident teachers feel to go in the classroom, to help their students make a difference, to improve, suggests to us the same thing, that the vast majority of them feel like they do not have the preparation they need to be fully successful in meeting the needs of English language learners. And so your role as evidence builders, not just innovators, not just great professional developers, but your role as evidence builders is so critical because we do need to fulfill the mission you see here on the screen. The notion that we need to ensure that more educators are better prepared to meet the needs of these students is a priority of our secretary, right? It is part of our agency's strategic plan, or will be when it's released, and part of all the work that we're doing in OELA, IES, and elsewhere to be sure that we are really meeting the needs of these students in new ways. And we depend upon you. So I don't know how often you all have gone to the What Works Clearinghouse, which I oversee in part, or have gone to the regional educational labs or any other provider and done a search on effective practices for EL professional development. I see nods. My guess is when you did that search, you saw what we knew was sorely lacking. It is critical that the projects you're doing, the innovations you're pioneering, what you're learning when you're training teachers and delivering PD gets captured and rigorously evaluated. Earlier, you heard about Project Amplify. I was super excited to hear about that because what is at the core of Project Amplify, I believe, is capturing, surfacing, and sharing your learnings. And we need much more of that in this field, almost more in this field than any other domain of practice that we have. Is everyone convinced evidence is important? You didn't just write that evaluation plan in the back of your grant application because you knew you needed to get those points in the application, right? All right. So if you believe in it, like, let's do it, right? And let's do it with some quality. So how do you actually design for moderate evidence of effectiveness? All right, so if you look at the kind of official Department of Education language about what we mean by that, we say a project evaluation can meet that standard, that evaluation criteria, if the evidence of effectiveness that you build can meet What Works Clearinghouse standards with or without reservations. Without looking at slides, which you may have of this presentation, and that would be cheating. Without looking at your slides, can anybody tell me what it means to meet WWC standards with or without reservations, or even hazard a guess? Ooh, is it an experimental design like a regression or regression discontinuity? That's good. There's a lot there. What else? Quasi experiments. Oh, you're speaking my language. How many of you are program evaluators by training? Well, y'all could just be up here at the front of the room and doing this session. You don't actually need me to do this. I should have asked that question first and then had you stand beside me and tell me like what I should say next. All right. Well, yes. So let's dig into RCTs and quasi experiments. Let's talk about specifically what it is that the What Works Clearinghouse is looking for in those designs to ensure they meet moderate evidence of effectiveness. I will say the standards are always evolving. They're always changing. It's my sense that all of you guys are going to be held to the standards in handbook version 4.1. That's the current version of the WWC standards. I will say we're in the process of revising the standards, and we put standards out version 5 for public comment. but I don't think we would hold you to things we did not tell you about in the grant. So I think the current version 4.1 probably is what applies to you. Whoops, I keep wanting to click at the screen and they told me not to do that. There we go. All right. So to meet this requirement, you are doing one of two types of evaluation. And we already heard it from the audience. We're either doing RCTs or QEDs. All right. How many of you are doing true experiments as part of your project? Man, there's two hands. You are, oh, three hands. All right. You guys are totally brave. Let me see those three hands again. Actually, y'all should stand up if you're able. And we should applaud these people for taking, go ahead. Yeah, if you have taken the step. So here's a little secret, I think. So people are afraid of randomized trials. They think they're hard to do. They are the easiest type of experiment to do. They can be hard to sell to your audience, but they are the easiest to design and analyze. So how many of you are doing quasi experiments? How many of you do not quite know what it is you are doing? That's okay too. All right, that's fine. There is no shame in that. So, well, I hope you're a 2021 grantee. If you raised your hand, if you're a 2017 grantee and aren't sure, you might need to come see us later. But yes, all right. So overwhelmingly, this group is doing quasi experiments. All right, that is good to know. Not entirely shocking and surprising. Let us just spend a brief moment talking about the difference between these two designs. Fast forward, there's one that obviously I prefer and think is better, but I will not try to twist your arm and make you believe as I do. So obviously in a true experiment, or perhaps not obviously, in a true experiment, access to the intervention is randomly assigned, right? We typically use lotteries or other ways, and we have a treatment and a control group. In quasi experiments, which we sometimes call QED, access to the intervention is not random. There's a treatment group and a comparison group. I get really nitpicky about the distinction between control and comparison groups. So when people tell me they have a control group, I get exceptionally excited because I believe they're doing an RCT. And then they tell me, I'm like, oh, you have a comparison group. So in any event, there is a difference between the random and non-random assignment to treatment, and then what we call the group that's not receiving treatment. So in a true experiment, right, by virtue of randomization, we often say kind of simply, the factors that might affect the outcome, both observed and unobserved, are randomly distributed or balanced across the treatment and control group. In contrast, in the QED, we can only balance things we observe, right? We typically build a comparison group by matching. We can only match people on things we can see, typically things we see in administrative data sets, right? So the balance is not necessarily quite as strong. The good thing about an RCT is because of randomization, we know we can attribute causality to the treatment. In a QED, we always have that asterisk, right? It's like a league table of like pitching stars or like best batters ever in baseball, right? There's always some dude who's got a star next to his record because later they found out there wasn't something quite right about how it is he achieved that record. That's kind of how QEDs are, right? They always have a little bit of a star after them. RCTs are the only designs, if well executed, that can meet standards without reservations, those with whom we have the greatest confidence. QEDs can meet with reservations, but you have to be doing one of these two designs in your evaluation to meet the department's requirement. And there are 4 features that we think distinguish high quality RCTs and high quality QEDs. You'll see them here on the slide: distinct groups, baseline equivalence, confounding factors, and appropriate outcome measures. I'm going to talk a bit about each of these. Yes, awesome. Thank you. Yes. So is anyone else doing single case design? A couple of you. All right. So the department does have single case design standards. In the current version of department regulations, we call them EDGAR, right? In the current version of EDGAR, single case designs, I do not believe are mentioned in modern evidence, but we are revising EDGAR at this very moment to get, or we're hoping to, crossing our fingers, to get single case designs into the evidence of effectiveness tiers. So we have standards for SCDs, not every single kind of SCD. There's lots of different flavors of single case designs. We have standards for most types of SCDs. And assuming we can get this Edgar revision done, we will slot SCDs into the existing framework. That's a great question, but keep raising it with OLA so we can be sure to keep you aware of where kind of that progress is happening. Thank you. Anything else before I dive in? Because, you know, I've got 2 years of in-person presenter energy like pent up inside of me, and I will just go and go if you don't like raise your hands. All right. All right, distinct groups. Now I will try to scan the room better. They told me to use the podium, but I can't handle being constrained by that thing. So distinct groups. So we have an intervention group and we have a control or comparison group. Your study should have 2 actually distinct groups, if you're not an SCD, 2 actually distinct groups of educators. It should not be one group compared to itself, like me this year versus me last year, nor should it be sequential cohorts, like new incoming teachers in 2017, followed by new incoming teachers in 2018. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to why we don't prefer those things to be the case? History effects, right? Maturation, right? For yourself in future years. Absolutely. There's confounding factors that make it difficult for us to understand whether it's the great PD you've delivered or some other change at play. So I will say if you're doing an RCT, remember, it must truly be random. So it has to be coin flip, you know, Excel auto number generator, whatever you're doing, a lottery, literally. And everybody must be able to be assigned to a group. So this can be the hard part about an RCT, especially when you're doing a pilot study with districts, right? So you go to a district, you go to a principal, you say, hey, we're gonna randomize, you know, and Mrs. Halpane's in the control group. And the principal's like, oh, she really needs this. I need her to be in the treatment group. Like, can you just like move her in the treatment group? No. And that like, and they'll beg, they'll be like, oh, she's the best, but she needs this PD, or oh, my school's really needy, or oh, no, you can't put this person in, or oh, the superintendent loves this person, they must get it. No, 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 no. No thumb on the scale for randomization, no special treatment. So it's not technically hard, but it can be relationally or politically or interpersonally hard, right? Sometimes to pull off that part of an RCT. Any questions on distinct groups? That's usually pretty clear. Yes, in the back. Oh, look at that. Man, somebody should like take away my evaluation card. All right, everyone, do you have copies of these slides in your deck? Yes? Oh, all right. Use the PDF comment feature or whatever you have at your disposal. Who gets the innovation? The treatment group. Who gets business as usual or some other treatment that you were the controller comparison? All right. Thank you. I should have just lied and said that was a test to see if y'all are paying attention rather than like embarrass myself and say I had a mistake on the slide. Anyway, all right. Thank you. Anything else on this? All right, let me move on. Baseline equivalence. This is my favorite. One of my favorites. So baseline equivalence is required for quasi experiments, and it's required for certain kinds of RCTs when things don't go quite as well as we had hoped. Things when we have high attrition. And we'll talk about attrition in just a second. So the premise behind baseline equivalence is that these 2 groups are, to the best of our ability, on observable characteristics statistically similar prior to the intervention. At a very simple level, this is about trying to ensure we have an apples to apples comparison, at least on the observables. And that's important because we want to be sure, to the best of our ability, particularly QED, to say with some degree of confidence that it's your PD, the thing you developed, that changed teacher practice or changed student outcomes, hopefully both, right? And so we don't want that confound to having 2 different groups. That What Works Clearinghouse Handbook goes into some more detail about how it is you do these adjustments and how big of a difference is tolerable. Usually small differences between groups are tolerable. Even in randomization, you're going to sometimes have small differences in observable characteristics, right? Small differences are usually okay. Middling differences can usually be statistically adjusted. There are some differences, some comparison groups that can be so dissimilar from the intervention group. We simply say they're not adjustable and you cannot fix those. In that case, unfortunately, studies don't meet standards. And that does happen, but it's thankfully pretty rare. Questions on apples to apples comparisons. Has anyone ever done a QED and found this to be the thing that really hung you up and you could not meet WWC standards? I see a few nods. This is usually one of the trickier things to meet. All right, confounds. So confounding factors are things that are completely aligned with either the treatment or the comparison control condition, right? And so this is bad because if there is something else in addition or other than the treatment, it becomes very difficult to disentangle whether it's the confound or whether it's the treatment that's doing the moving of the needle on student outcomes or teacher practices. And if we can't make that strong claim that it's your treatment, not something else, then you fail to meet the standards. So the most common confounds are on the slides. And the smaller your study, the more likely it is you may encounter one of these confounds, right? So the most common confounds are you have a single unit. So your study is done inside only one school, only one classroom, you have only one teacher, you have only one trainer, or when the treatment and comparisons happen at two different points in time. And again, the reason we have this first bullet, this kind of single unit N of one problem is, imagine if you have a single trainer out there delivering your PD, right? Is it because your PD is great or is it because your trainer is great, right? We can't disentangle that. So we need to have things that ensure that no feature of the design of your experiment is completely aligned to the experimental or control condition. This makes some sense? I see a man who literally gave me 2 thumbs up and the biggest grin, I think, like behind that mask. So that gives me hope.
Comparison group to come from the same school building because of the other PD that they get there that's extraneous that could be affecting the outcome?
Well, so it would be ideal to have multiple, you could obviously compare students inside one school, right, in your experiment, if you have multiple schools, right? Because the concern would be that it is some school condition, it's a teacher, it's a department head. It's really trying to make sure that we have some variation, right? So it's not tightly linking the treatment to the outcomes we see. So there's no problem having treatment and comparison students from the same building. That happens a lot. I mean, when you're doing a PD study, it can be a bit tricky. Teachers talk, right? Teachers share practices. And so there can be contamination, it's a bad word, contamination, right? Like you hear from your colleague, oh, I'm doing this great new PD. They tell me to do X, Y, Z. And then suddenly all the control teachers start doing X, Y, Z and you see no effect. It's not because your intervention wasn't great. It was. The problem was your control group learned about it and started doing it, right? And increased outcomes in just the same way. So yeah, if you're doing a random assignment study and you can randomize schools, that's preferable because teachers talk across schools as well, but teachers talking inside schools is a much trickier or much more likely phenomenon to occur, right? Any other questions on confounds? These kind of singularly aligned, oh, I see a hand waving in the way back. Or is that trying to get some, oh, excellent.
Randomizing schools and you're talking about professional development. I guess my question was, could you talk a bit about units of analysis? Because that changes your experiment quite differently if you're talking about randomizing at the school or teacher level versus the student level.
Yes. So you need to be sure randomization, analysis, and inference are 3 different kind of levels you can look at your study, right? Like, who am I randomizing? How am I analyzing those data? What population, what groups am I drawing inference from as a result of that analysis? You need to be sure you're keeping all of those straight. I don't want to get into it in this particular setting because I feel like it could be a bit of a rabbit hole, but I will say we go into great detail in the What Works Clearinghouse handbook about how, if you're doing what we call a cluster randomized design or other kind of designs, how you keep all of those straight. But you do need to attend to that, and we can talk offline or back in the back more if you would like, but that's a good question. One last thing, measures. So this is something that we are kind of leaning into at IAS this year. I don't know how many of you knew the really good work of Bob Slavin. He was the gentleman at Johns Hopkins who stood up evidence for ESSA and other, a long time advocate for evidence-based practice in the classroom. He had a lot of concern about what he called researcher-designed measures. He was worried that too many studies were measuring outcomes, either of teacher practice or student outcomes, using measures developed by the interventionist, right? And because it was designed by the interventionist, the measure looked for exactly what it was that the intervention did, and therefore got huge effect sizes, right? Because of course, the thing was looking for the exact thing the training was about. And Bob was concerned that we were creating reams and reams of research that inflated the effectiveness of interventions because of this issue that he talked about researcher design measures. So we fixate less on who wrote the intervention right now as to whether the intervention and the measures are over-aligned. So I would strongly encourage you, when you're designing your study, if you can, for at least your student outcomes component, if you have it, or even teacher practice measures, if there is a existing, well-known, standardized measure that can work for you, I would strongly encourage you to include it. It may be that the work you're doing is so different from work in the main, those measures don't exist. You may find yourself needing to make your own measures. We understand that. But if there are options for standardized, well-known measures, please think about including it. If you're designing your own measure, please be sure that it's not over-aligned with the intervention. You want to have a fair test, right, of your PD. You don't want to put your thumb on the scale for your PD, no matter how much you love it. You want it to be a fair test. And so it would not, for example, be a fair test to, if this is a spelling intervention, not probably useful here, but a spelling intervention that taught students 20 words, you wouldn't want to have the test be looking for just those 20 words, right? Because the intervention group would have been drilled on those 20 words the entire time. The control group might never have seen those 20 words. It wouldn't be a fair test. So if you can't find a standardized, well-known, nationally norms, instrument out there that's reliable and valid, and you need to make your own, please think about, am I tilting the scale with my measures in favor of my instrument? Am I giving it a fair shot or not? Reviewers will look for that. And it's a judgment call, right? There's no numeric standard for over-alignment, but I would really encourage you to be attentive to the standard, something we're trying to be more aware of going forward. All right. Oh, yes.
So if you're doing a technological intervention and in-person intervention, does that assessment have to be delivered technologically as they're learning, coaching online approach? So should that one be different than the in-person one, or is it?
So the question is, if you have a technology-based intervention and the comparison condition is an in-person, is a non-digital intervention, what kind of assessment is appropriate for that? And is there the possibility that if you have a technology-driven assessment that the students in the technology or the teachers in the technology-driven intervention arm of the trial might do better for some reason than in the paper version or the other version? I think that's a fair question. There's no immediate yes or no, right? I mean, typically, I think there's no obvious answer. I would probably try to design my studies such that if my PD were digitally driven, the business as usual with some other digitally driven PD, right? To try to eliminate that confounding factor. If that's really not possible, I think that you do run a risk of saying, well, these people had access to technology for 18 weeks of the PD. Of course, they're going to be better able to respond to a measure that's delivered electronically. So I think there's some danger of that. And we can talk more about specifically what you're doing to think about how you might kind of strengthen that. I would be worried about the mode effect, I think. All right, for RCTs, attrition. So attrition happens when you get to the end of your study and you do not have outcome data for all of the folks in your experiment or your quasi experiment. Not surprisingly, the presence of attrition can cause bias in your estimate, in addition to making your estimates less precise. And so we need to figure out, when you have an RCT, what the attrition looks like and where it rests inside your experiment. There are two kinds of attrition. There is overall attrition, which looks across study groups. Overall attrition is annoying. It reduces your statistical power. It makes it harder to find an effect. But overall attrition can actually be fairly high before you begin to bias your results. So if you've seen the WWC handbook, we have a lovely red, yellow, and green figure that depicts what we call attrition boundaries, as well as a table that kind of breaks it down. You can have attrition above 50% overall and still meet standards, still not have high attrition. However, if you have attrition between groups, if the treatment and control group drop out or have data unavailable at different rates, that can be very problematic, right? Because that means there is something about either the treatment or control condition is driving out potentially people who are systematically similar, and your results may be biased. The thresholds for differential attrition are very, very low, right? So I have some general rules of thumb here. It's on a curve, which I did not depict on this slide, but just as a general rule, differential attrition can never exceed 11%. And if your overall attrition is high, you can't have any differential attrition at all, right? So overall attrition, not so bad. If something happens and a whole school drops out or a whole district drops out and you lose almost half your sample, you can still probably recover from that. If there is something, though, between your treatment and control condition where droves of people are leaving just one group, that can be seriously problematic and can be difficult to recover from. Because the question then is, what is it that's causing that differential treatment between those two groups? There are solutions. We give some suggestions in the handbook about how you can overcome differential attrition. But hopefully you'll not encounter this, but it is a real concern if you're doing an RCT. So here are some key kind of methodological takeaways at a 30,000-foot view. So always start with 2 randomly assigned or well-matched groups. Assess baseline equivalence for all your QEDs, for your high attrition RCTs, and if something goes wrong in randomization. Avoid those confounds and use reliable or valid measures that aren't over-aligned to the intervention. All right. Are there questions about WWC standards? Is anybody here a WWC certified reviewer? Hey, check it out. All right. So when I'm gone, these folks who raise their hand, they are the people who will be able to answer all of your questions. You can find them during the networking session and be like, hey, can we talk some more about differential attrition? They'll be able to give you the answers. A hand. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
On our first progress report, we indicated whether anyone on our team was certified as, will there be opportunities for team members to become certified if they want to be?
I have got a slide on that very issue. Nothing would make me happier if tonight, rather than saying, you know what, I want to explore Northern Virginia. I want to see what DC is all about. If you all went back to your rooms, logged on the WWC website and took reviewer training, that would be, God, wouldn't that be the best thing ever? I mean, you would be so smart. We would never have to have this session again. So training used to be horrible. I don't know when you all got certified. Training used to be horrible. When I was trained long ago, I was locked in a conference room for like days. There were these trainers. I mean, You thought that was boring. Geez, I mean, like doing that for like 4 days. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. So days and days of training, having to do these reviews. Now you can do it on your own. It's all online. You can do it in your own time. You get feedback virtually immediately about how you're doing. It is dramatically improved. So all that to say, I will show you that link. I would love for you all to do it. It is way better. You can get group design training. You can get single case design training. I think RDD is maybe woven into, it might be separate still. So I will show you the link later, but yes, the more the merrier for WWC certification. Other questions? Right there.
Okay, I'm going to try to articulate this. Certain kinds of research designs have ontological and existential implications into what we as a collective believe what works, right? We literally create what works. So I'm wondering in the What Works Clearinghouse, if there is room, especially right now as they're working on revisions, to opening up to other kinds of research designs, in particular qualitative research designs that can also bring in some nuanced understandings of what works in the classroom, and what are the means to expand that definition.
That's a great question. So I'm going to give you an answer that is not going to be probably satisfactory to you or to anyone in the room. So the WWC is rooted in a positivist kind of paradigm, right? It is dependent upon null hypothesis significance testing. It is connected to p-values. It is focused on internal validity in a very narrow framework. So I would be really honest with you. So the version 5 handbook, which is out of public comment right now, is not going to lean into the questions and the issues that you raised. That is not at all the same thing as it should not lean into that, or the kind of information you're talking about collecting through qualitative or other methods isn't critical to inform this kind of work. So we have this problem as a research community, right? Kind of, we're all wrestling with how is it that we kind of change our paradigms about research, who gets involved in knowledge creation, who gets to define what effective means, who helps us interpret, what we're seeing as a result of our studies. There is room for an entire revamp of that entire kind of architecture of educational research, but we are not there yet. Certainly at the IAS level, we're trying to balance lots of concerns, but we want to hear people's best thoughts on that. In a program I oversee related to the regional education labs, we are really retaining our kind of traditional RCT and QED focus, but we are pushing really hard in 2 domains. Concurrent or sequential mixed method studies to at least bring in other ways of knowing and thinking, and then participatory design, right? So asking people in the community from jump to tell us, what should we be studying? What are the questions? How should it be done? Who should be involved? How do we make meaning? How do we ensure that what we learn is actionable for your community? So we're going there in some other spaces of our work, but the WWC is not there yet and probably won't be there right away. One last thing I'll say on that, somebody mentioned ESSA, right, as being related to evidence. People have come to me and said, can we just get rid of statistical significance? It's outdated and it's outmoded. Nobody wants that anymore. Like ESSA bakes that into statistical significance is baked into the law of ESSA, right? It literally requires you to be statistically significant. So we are a ways away from where you might want us to be, but I think conversations like this and then sustained dialogue will help us get there. Just not as quickly as you might want to, and probably not in dependency of your grant. Excellent question, though. I appreciate it. Is that a question? Yes.
You've been talking a lot about 2 group designs. What if a team was doing a 3 group where it might be a training plus a coaching, and a control?
Yeah.
Are there any special considerations for those?
Reviewers, or there's a special, I think we would look at those contrasts separately. So I wouldn't see that as being problematic. I think that's fine. Nor does the control have to be nothing, right? So often it's really hard to sell an RCT because people think you're not going to give anything to the control condition. It can be some other form of good PD that's proven, right? That you're contrasting your innovation to. So don't think about the control conditions always being the absence of something good, right? It can still be an active control, just the contrast, the comparison is somewhat different, right? Yes.
Hi there. Thanks for this help. One of the things you mentioned is the importance of the measures that we're using. And it would be nice if we had, I mean, there's a whole lot of expertise in this room, right? From the people who have done these grants for years, for decades. And likely they have really nice measures. So I'm wondering what either the WWC or maybe OELA is doing or has thought to do to help us collaborate and perhaps use those same measures. So myself, I've adapted from another NPD project. I've given it to a new NPD project, and it was a measure based on a whole lot of other well-validated surveys. So yes, any thoughts or support in that realm, I think is super important and could be
Yeah,
helpful.
so I'm not gonna tell Francisco or Superiority what they should do. They could do a measures clearinghouse if they want it, right? Where you upload all your measures, and there's lots of options. So three thoughts. One, this might be a sore subject based on what I heard coming into the room. IS typically gives measurement grants, right? Through our big grant competition. It is hard to get an IS grant. I know some people have tried a lot and had negative experiences. I do not give out those grants. Please do not take that out on me. But measurement grants are super important, right? Because we need people to be able to develop things and then spend some sustained time understanding how they work for whom and what conditions. So if you have something that has a reasonable track record that you feel good about, that you think needs to be used more broadly, I would encourage you to apply for a measurement grant to really kind of make sure that it's you kind of dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's with it. But then it becomes one of those measures that's validated, potentially commonly used, kind of that pantheon of kind of top tier measures. But even if you don't do that, it makes perfect sense for the program office to create some sort of roster, right, of measures at least, and how to get in touch with them. Third, I'll say, tying back to Amplify, and later on in my speech or talk, whatever, we desperately want you to upload all the artifacts, all the research artifacts of your work to Eric. Do you guys know what Eric is? Does it bring back like bad memories of grad school? And that was like the only way you could find, God, wasn't it horrible? Like how many of you used Eric when it was on microfilm? Yeah, right. I mean, or I guess that was microfiche, right? It was like the small thin things. Yeah, I don't think it came on film. I know, man, that's horrible. And so it's better. It's like incrementally better. Not as great as it could be, but Eric, right, is the department's repository of educational research. It's like our bibliographic database. It includes full text and non-full text stuff. It links out to journals, hopefully journals you want to read, but critically, it also contains grantee submissions or any other research product that folks who have copyright can upload it to, right? To begin to catalog and preserve forever that kind of information. So I'm gonna later tell you to submit your stuff to Eric. Submit those measures, submit the papers that document the properties of those measures, that list the questions, right? To have the technical appendices to explain, like, here's how to ask, all that good stuff. Get into Eric. Once it's in, it lives there for forever, right? It doesn't get lost. And then we can talk about how we support you guys, Noella, in building a repository, even something like a shared Word doc with links to everything, right? So people know what's available. That's a great idea. Oh, yes.
Other day, so I'll skip my commentary on the ethics of randomized control studies, but
Thank you.
I just know I don't think they are. So
You were definitely not the only one, so that's okay. You were in good company. Yeah.
So I really liked, I was waiting, but now I snuck ahead to see what your practical considerations are. And I'd like to offer some things for what we need help, and
Yeah.
maybe we as me only. But we receive 5-year grants. Any of us involved in teacher education know that change is not a single semester. or a quick 3-month look. Much of what's done under the umbrella of randomized control studies are skill-based learning for students. Spelling, vocabulary, something very isolated and extracted out of the real context of teachers' everyday learning and teachers' everyday lives. So when I'm here, I want practical considerations. No ENL certification, I don't think, in the country is even a 1-year endeavor. Ours is 18 months for people from start to finish. And those are the ways that we need support to raise the quality of quasi-experimental designs that we do that are longitudinal in nature, that take into account real models of teacher learning. Now, I'm a quantitative researcher by preparation, but I have long since become a critical sociocultural scholar, meaning I'm not so interested in how I drill kids. I'm interested in getting kids to dialogue. I'm interested in pedagogical practices. And so I don't know if this is the right venue, but when you say practical considerations, I'd love for it to be really at the level that grantees who have 5-year grants to study teacher learning could get support with the challenges that we face of looking at cohorts across multiple years and that. I don't want to sound complaining, but to talk to us about randomized control studies, which were clearly the brilliant option, which are about lab rats or college freshmen. I wish that IES and those of you in power would really begin to think about these very important designs and generating evidence in ways that allow us to contribute in real ways.
Yep.
Instead of idealized.
Yep. Hey. So what I would say is you are far from alone. Your colleagues agree with you, or some share of your colleagues agree with you. I think there's several issues at play. One is the structure of the grant, right? That's one consideration, but different from the kind of investigation and inquiry we ask you to do. I can't do much about the structure of the grant, but we can definitely talk about what do more authentic ways of evaluating, in air quotes, let's say, right, of evaluating this work looks like. That's the kind of dialogue we need to be having, I think, as a research community. And I think IES is beginning to lean into, but it is truly early days. So it is not satisfactory or satisfying probably to you to hear today. Well, right now, we need you to operate inside of this kind of internal validity, RCT, QED, WWC driven framework, right? And it's probably facile for me to say, well, blame it all on ESSA, right? Because it's not just ESSA's fault, although ESSA is a constraint. It is not the only constraint, but I think we should be having this dialogue. So if there is, I don't know what the range of community of practices that are being set up inside the grantee networks are, but if you guys have a community of practice focused on authentic measurement, authentic meaning making, authentic evaluation, I think that's a conversation we can have. It sounds like we need more methods, if not different. We need more methods, certainly. Different ways of thinking about who has knowledge and who declares what knowledge is, right? And maybe some structural changes to the grants. Again, I can't do much for the structural changes for the grant, but I'm really willing to lean in with you guys on the first part of, should we even be doing it this way to begin with, right? Which I think is a really fair question to ask.
Discussions with multiple people like you at tables here where we can leverage power. So much of the decision decisions we make are in isolation in the writing part, where we would benefit from ongoing dialogue at these very events.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's talk about it. So I know you met, I think you met with Helen and Kim yesterday, right, from NCER. Did you have folks from Nixer? Is that a 1 minute warning or you have a question? Oh, question, all right. Yeah, so there are many people at IES who want to have that conversation. There's people in the education community writ large who want to have that conversation, right? AERA, other places. So let's find ways to do it. I want to be really honest with you. Those WWC standards, like those will not be changing quickly, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be laying the foundation for like, what might that look like so that the folks who are following in our footsteps have it easier or better, right, than we did. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Yeah.
So I just wanted to offer a resource. I do a lot of work in measure development, and there's a website called edinstruments.org.
Yes, supported
And
by
they're
IES.
developing a repository. I'm also a member of a 5-year NSF grant that we're building a repository where we're cataloging all the validity and reliability evidence related to mathematics education measures. So that's forthcoming too. The Ed Instruments doesn't catalog all of the validity and reliability evidence, and we know that there's a lot of measures that don't have that out there. But so I just wanted to offer that as a suggestion and resource.
Thank you. I should have totally done. So Susanna Loeb and her team at Brown University, Annenberg Institute are standing up Ed Instruments. It's kind of topically driven. I don't know quite yet which all domains they've worked their way through, but definitely check out Ed Instruments. Ed Instruments. If you're doing, this probably isn't relevant for you guys, but the NIH Toolkit or Toolbox is another instrument repository. So there are a few. There are a few. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. So I'm literally the last person here sitting near the door.
You didn't escape. That's good. I like it.
So yes, I mean, obviously this is my first NPD conference here. So thanks to Clemson University, whom I'm representing as the external evaluator. I'm from MN Associates Inc., Kavita. So in my past life, I was one of the coders for the What Works Clearinghouse and made a very quick exit. The reason being the extreme deterministic, positivistic approach was not for me. Having trained in research methods and designs, a mixed methods, and more so, we would all agree that context really, really matters. And having come from a classroom, a research background, it is a struggle. However, I also agree with some of the ideas that WWC has put forth in terms of being creative. There are ways of doing randomized controlled trials within a small group. It doesn't have to be across all years of the grant, but it could be in some parts, and it has been successful. So one thing that I would really like this group is to form a community of practice for us evaluators where we can share our designs, where we can talk through the challenges and lessons learned, because I don't believe that happens. I've made some contacts here informally, and where we have started talking about evaluation designs, like, oops, I could have done this. Oops, maybe I could have suggested this. I think that is something that's necessary, because we feel isolated when we are working at our computers, trying to churn out numbers and feeling left out and struggling to find that evidence. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
All right. Francisco has his pen out. I think he is writing down that idea. So, or maybe he's doing his, no, I don't know. I'm sure he's writing down the idea. All right. Another question.
Ya kwaka yuku nga mani inqilituita tusqat litak sukuluki kuyawikluki lumanchuk nga lumnik. Hi, I'm Yupik from Alaska, and I want to acknowledge the first people that were here before us, to recognize them and thank them for allowing us to be here. And talking about practical considerations, being an Indigenous person who always has been on the lower end of the achievement gap, always. But I'm one of the more colonized Indigenous people who has successfully got her PhD. But I did it because of the practical considerations that were given to me by my advisors, to include my language, to include my culture, to include the ancestors that were part of my learning. So going back to the presentations yesterday, they talked about family, they talked about social emotional learning, they talked about community, funds of knowledge to be brought into the school system. And if we continue to evaluate and collect the data from the individualized perspective, many of the otherized populations are going to continue to fail. And so therefore, like for us that are reawakening in integrating the way that we live and the way that we have our worldviews and to share our stories, the qualitative research is very important. Otherwise, if we continue to maintain individualized, we're going to keep getting the same results. And yesterday, I was very grateful to continue to hear families, social emotional learning, bring them in. It hasn't been working for English language learners. And what's good for Indigenous people is good for all people. What's good for EL, English language learners, is good for all people. So we as part of practical consideration, we do need to think in a community way as way of collecting data. Boyana, thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have lots of opportunity to lean into these issues. I can't speak for the program office, but know that to the extent in which there is energy to engage IES, to engage our networks, we will come to you at this conference. We will come to you in video, wherever you are, wherever you want to talk about these issues, we will be. That's what our job is. And so if we can be helpmates to you in figuring out what new and better looks like, then by all means, we will. Supreet definitely has my number, so she knows how to engage us. So these are practical resources of a sort, right? We know of what kind of sort they are, right? Inside the sort of WWC framework, they run from less complex to more complex. I'd say the first two resources from the WWC program, these are both WWC resources, are fairly simple to understand. They're the kind of things that I think, even if you don't have an evaluation background, you would feel comfortable with. They're the kind of things with some adaptation could be shared with stakeholders to explain why you've made certain choices about designs or how to look at a strong study. The second two are more complex, probably would appeal more to folks who are comfortable with RCTs and QEDs. If you need help analyzing the RCT data you're collecting, we have a product called Rct Yes. I'm not sure if any of you have ever tried to use Rct Yes. When I'm on the stump like this, I usually call it Rct Maybe, because I'm never quite sure once I'm done with Rct Yes, whether I've been satisfied with it as I might want to. But know that there are some practical resources that can assist you with the evaluation planning and execution at these websites. I think probably most of you all of you who are in the 2017 cohort have already kind of achieved these milestones. A few key timing considerations driven by the standards, just some takeaways about thinking when you need to be doing certain activities to be more likely to kind of hit the WWC marks. If you have an outside evaluator, engage in them as early as in the process as possible. Here is the link, a simple link, a short link to the WWC reviewer training. Again, you could go out and see all the things that DC as a community has to offer tonight, or you could dig into group design training with the WWC. Totally your choice, but now you have the option. Knowing how to get there will not be the barrier in you becoming a certified reviewer. I think other good reminders, If you are needing to collect data that you yourself are not the data steward for, be sure you have done that as early as possible in the process. If you have not updated or refined your logic model to be sure that you have a really clear sense of what it is you were up to with your intervention, do so as early in the evaluation design process as you possibly can. If you want to be sure to double check that your study will meet baseline equivalence standards, I've included the link to the study review protocol, the generic study review protocol that the WWC uses when reviewing studies. It lists all the outcomes you would need to have for baseline equivalence for a QED. And then finally, just a reminder, get your instrumentation done as quickly as possible because you want to be sure you have that available to you at baseline measurement. Finally, I want to be sure your work is seen. So again, I was really excited to see Project Amplify. I was not aware of it, but it is consistent with this slide. We want to be sure that the research articles, white papers, conference presentations, anything that is capturing your story and is describing the research and can help point people in the right direction for their own work gets into ERIC. So if you haven't been to ERIC recently, just go to eric.ed.gov, and at the bottom of the page, there's a link for submit. And so long as you are the kind of copyright holder or the authorized person to let someone else upload a paper, right, to a repository, you can submit your paper to, you can submit your paper to ERIC. That will help be sure that when people are looking for research, like you might have been when you started the project and found research wanting, that there'll be more in the system, right, that they can find. It'll also make sure that we're aware of it in IAS. We also syndicate all of this information out to like Google Scholar and EBSCO and all those things. So putting your work into ERIC dramatically increases the likelihood somebody else is going to find it and be able to make a difference for their project and for their students. With that, if there's any time left, I don't know how much there may be, I'll take any other questions.
You have 13 minutes left.
I have 13 minutes left, 13 lucky minutes. Questions folks have? Oh, there's a hold on. You're number two.
Hi. Thank you. So this is probably a little bit of a question and a little bit of a comment maybe for Francisco and your team. One of the things we are noticing that is not an issue with our current NPD grants, but as we continue to have conversations with our school systems is that I think they are becoming increasingly reluctant to share data, particularly post-COVID, and as they are looking at all of the other priorities they are balancing. So I don't want to sound like I'm critical of our school partners because I think their priority is the best interests of their students and their staff. But this is something I wonder as we think about designing evaluations and what variables we want to measure. I wonder if this is something that's coming up either in conversations at the OELA level, thinking about how you evaluate our evaluation sections, or if this is something that, maybe is something we can continue to dialogue with grantees about. Because like I said, we've been lucky so far in our projects, but I see the conversations that a lot of colleagues are having. And I do think as we try to think about how to measure whether our grants are impactful, this is a barrier that's increasingly going to be coming up.
Yeah, are others having data access troubles? Yeah. Have folks found any strategies that are particularly effective in surmounting those? Building the relationship, yep. Absolutely, that's probably the single most impactful thing you can do, right? Is build the relationship. Yeah, so we've seen that happening across all of our projects. We've also seen an increasing number of districts who want to review our studies before we release them because they want to be sure that their district or their teachers or their students are being talked about in a way that they think reflects their experience. And that's been a challenge for us as well to kind of get used to that sort of different level of research review.
I was just going to add, beyond building relationships, partner with 1 to 2 people at the school district level or at the building levels themselves who know the right people then to ask to help them to get access to the data that's specific for the needs of the project. So in our case, we have a principal at one of our buildings who knows who to go to, one of her associate superintendents, and that person can then advocate for the need for that data for that building and also support the other school building that we need data from as well.
Yeah, identifying gatekeepers who can help you is really important. There's a question up here.
Thank you. So I don't know if it's even appropriate to ask you this because there's probably very little you can do about this, but these grants are structured like people have said so that they roll out over 5 years. And so we run into statistical power problems because let's say, for example, I've got a campus I'm working with, a district I'm working with has like 26 campuses or something. And I assign 13 schools to one group, 13 to another. Well, I've got maybe 60 teachers total that we can treat. When we've got to treat teachers every single year. Well, if we're treating teachers every single year, I'm rolling it out a little bit at a time. And we've got really, the sample size that we have in the way of teachers is really limited. And I don't know if there's any way to increase the dialogue between you guys and what's going on here with OELA so that it's possible maybe for the study to boom, we do a big intervention 1 year or something like that. Or I don't know if there's any other ideas that you might have about ways to ameliorate that problem.
So we can definitely talk with OELA about how to, so going back to a prior comment, it would be really interesting to look at the different designs you guys are using, what's working well, what's not working well, and maybe how we might think about if there are parameters that can be changed, how we could change them in ways that are more conducive to your work. I think it'd be cool to see designs you wish you could do or things think you cannot do, right? And then take a look at them and say, oh, well, maybe there is a way to make those possible, right? So I think we should surface those things and talk in conversation with the program office. I mean, the last thing I would want would be for WWC standards to be the thing that stood in the way of you developing and testing something that was really potentially hugely impactful on the field, right? So I think we need to hear more about those. So Francisco and Supreet and I can talk. I think, this is not a solution you can use right now because of the way ESSA requires statistical significance, but, we're also exploring, still in a kind of quantitative framework. We're exploring Bayesian methods, right? Other ways to increase the power of our work, right? So that we're not hampered necessarily by small sample sizes, or we can combine multiple studies to build evidence. So I think we're kind of looking at those. But yeah, I would be more than glad to have conversations about, are there really promising designs that people aren't able to do or do well because of some constraint, either in the standards, and perhaps if Francisco and Supreet are open to it in the structure of the grant.
My comment goes back to the previous question about collecting data with districts, and not a huge amount of money, but we've budgeted like 10,000 for each district that we're partnering with for someone from central office. So it's either a superintendent or a director at central office to be a part of our core team. And that has helped make sure we have access to all the data we need.
Yeah. So stipends sort of, right, to data access data stewards. Yep. Other questions? As you're thinking about them, somewhere I have the clicker. All right. So this is my email address. Feel free to contact me. If I do not know the answer, I will probably know the person who does know the answer, and I'll do my best to connect them to you. If you all get together and impress upon Supreet and Francisco and others and say, hey, we need more conversations of X type, and if that involves IES, know that we will go on that journey with you. We want and need to do it, and it's great to know there's energy in an actually defined group of folks who want to go on that journey with us as well. So please don't hesitate to make that ask of us. We will meet it if we can. If you want to learn more about the WWC, that website's also listed there. That's also where you find the reviewer training. So now that the Final Four is over, you can do your reviewer training now, right? Anything else? You might get a couple minutes early. Going once, going twice. All right, thanks you guys. It's been my pleasure. If you need something, don't hesitate to reach back out to me. Have a great day, y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Solner. All right. So we have 3 housekeeping items for y'all. If you're an evaluator, a few of those folks will be meeting here today during lunch. And so we're thinking maybe the back tables there that are closest to the foyer would be a great place for evaluators, completely voluntary. But if you're looking to connect, they will be having lunch together today over there. So please join them. Also, just a reminder, it's the same lunch setup as yesterday. So you've got your tickets inside your badge it's color coded. If you have any questions, there are Encella staff and hotel staff out there to help you. And then lastly, we've got our poster presentation next at 1 p.m. Super excited for this. It's an Independence. Just a reminder about the little routine for that. So it's going to be first hour. So it's 1 to 3. So if you have an even number poster, so you're 2, 4, 6, 8, you will be presenting first. So you'll be going from 1 to 2. That allows the other poster presenters to look around. And then we're going to swap. So at 2 o'clock, if you are an odd number poster, 1 through 5, for example, you're going to present from 2 to 3. And to make things fun this year, we have a challenge for y'all. So you're going to pick up a passport when you get up to Independence A. It's going to be right there in the front table. So get your passport. And when you go to the different posters, those presenters are going to stamp it. And if you get 15, go ahead and you'll actually go to the front desk again, give them your passport. They will give you a raffle ticket, and then we'll be raffling off several prizes at the end for those people who are drawn. So that is the plan for today. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you at 1 o'clock.
They didn't believe me. Your lips